Hello everybody and welcome to another top 5 board gaming video. Today's topic is all about virus-themed board games. For anybody who's been living under a rock the last couple of months, first off, please stay under your rock for at least the next few weeks. And secondly, there is a virus designated as COVID-19 that has been spreading all across the world in this time. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has declared it as a pandemic. It has been spreading at absolute wildfire levels. It is very highly infectious, and it also has a relatively high morbidity and mortality rate. Countries all over the planet, including North America as well as Europe, have shut down borders, they have shut down schools, they've shut down large public events, all sorts of different stuff like that. And a lot of places have highly recommended people self-quarantine, even if they don't necessarily have to, saying things like work from home if you're able to, and all of these kinds of things. For me personally, I have been forced to self-quarantine because there is somebody who works in my office building who was diagnosed as COVID-19 positive, and they could have potentially spread it to a lot of other people. So it is a very scary situation. It's a really nasty place to be in right now, and it's really scary, frankly. So that said, really quickly, I wanted to go into a little bit of the science for this particular virus. This is a coronavirus. It is a member of the Coronavirinae family. This is the same family that SARS from a few years ago is in, and that means that this is an RNA positive single-strand virus. If any of you are curious about it, you can let me know, or you can just Google it. But essentially, with all of this going on, especially with self-quarantine and things like that, I wanted to sort of lift spirits a little bit and kind of do something that's a little bit fun with the whole thing, and that is to say, talk about board games related to viruses. Now, for me personally, I'm not allowed to leave my house. Board games are a great way to combat all of the boredom and everything that tends to happen. And I say, well, why not play games that are about viruses? Whether you're fighting the viruses or you're fighting as the virus, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this, and just sort of kind of saying, oh yeah, you know, it's fun something or other that we can at least do to try to take our minds off of everything that's going on. That said, of course, I would love to hear from you guys and what you have to say. If you're quarantined, whether by yourself or you've been forced to, whatever it is, what are your favorite games to be playing? Are you playing games? And of course, what are your favorite games of this particular category? Let me know anything and everything in the comments below, because you guys know I love to hear from it. That said, we're going to jump right in with my number 5. At number 5, I've got Cytosis, and more specifically, the virus expansion. Now, full disclosure, this is a game that I did help make and bring to life, and I'm very, very proud of that fact. But regardless, the game itself is a worker placement game that takes place inside of a mammalian cell, where you're trying to build up receptors and proteins and all sorts of stuff like that in order to send out of your particular cell. The virus expansion adds in the immune system. You have to build up your antibody resistance for whenever the viruses come in and attack. The reason it's so low on the list, though, is because it's a very, very abstractly done thing. Obviously, all of the things here are done abstractly, but this one even more so, because it's essentially a competition between you and your fellow players. Whoever has the most antibody gets a bonus and things of that nature. That said, the actual viruses that are used in this are true named viruses from the world, and so it's kind of cool in that sense, but you're not necessarily going to get a lot of virus information by playing this game. That said, it's still a wonderful worker placement. Cytosis and the virus expansion, my number 5. At number 4, I've got Strain, as the tagline says, a family game of competitive bioengineering. In this game, the idea is that you're trying to build up cells through individual component tiles. You start off with a central tile, and then you try and surround it with particular organelles, defensive mechanisms, all sorts of other different stuff like that. And then after you have a certain number, you can score that and get points for it. Effectively, I love this game because you have a lot of true aspects to how a cell functions. Again, very abstract, where you have things like the cytoplasm and rRNA and mRNA and the mitochondria and the Golgi apparatus and all sorts of different stuff like that. In addition, the component that you're putting down in the center is your nucleus. So a lot of this really makes sense, and on top of that, you have the viral aspect, which is how you can attack your opponents relatively directly. And the idea is that you can have resistances towards viruses, you have shield defenses, you can destroy viruses through cytotoxins and a few other different different things, and it's really cool in that sense. In addition, you've got actual named viruses such as varicella zoster, which is chickenpox for anybody unaware, but effectively it's lower on the list because it still feels kind of cartoony and you're out of the element in terms of it's not exactly how things go. You're not like directly attacking people or anything along those lines, but it's still a very well done game. It's a lot of fun, and very importantly, it plays a bunch of people as well. Strain, my number 4. At number 3, I've got Pandemic. It's shocking, I know, but specifically, I wanted to talk about the In the Lab expansion. Now, you guys know that On the Brink is my favorite expansion for this game, but In the Lab is a very close second. I really love the way that In the Lab is presented, where effectively the idea of this game overall is you're trying to combat various diseases and you're trying to push them back, you're trying to cure them, you're trying to stave off a pandemic. That is the whole point of the game. With the In the Lab expansion, you get some really nifty little things that are related directly to the molecular biology that is done in order to determine how can we fight these particular diseases. So you're looking at things like DNA sequencing, looking at things like how can we grow this, how can we collect it, and then how can we finally figure out how to get a cure for it. It's a really, really cool expansion. I love the way it's presented, and as a molecular biologist myself, it always just makes me go squee. That said, obviously it's a very cliche pick for this particular list. That's why it's kind of middle of the road. But for me personally, if you add that In the Lab expansion, it just takes it up to another level of at least somewhat realism. Although again, of course, it is still abstract. It's a lot of fun. In the Lab expansion for Pandemic, my number 3. At number 2, I've got Pathogenesis. First and foremost, I would like to say that this by far is the absolute best representation of a biological system that I have ever seen in any board game. In this case, the particular system is the immune system. The idea of this is that all of the players are playing as viruses, bacteria, pathogens, whatever you want to say, and they're trying to attack a human system through different routes of infection. And this is a deck building game where you're trying to build up your individual diseases by adding on specific types of proteins, defense mechanisms, toxins, all sorts of different things like that. And the greatest thing is that everything is very accurate in terms of what you would see inside of an immune system. You have the innate immune response versus the adaptive immune response, the different types of white blood cells, how they interact with pathogens, how they react to specific subtypes of antibodies, the complement system. I can go on and on and on. Honestly, also one of my favorite things about this game is you have random environments where you can say like a cut, and so it becomes easier to infect somebody. You also have things like you can say that hand washing has been reduced, so you become more infectious and stuff along those lines. It's absolutely amazing. It's a very well designed and really fun game. I actually reviewed it if you guys want to take a look at it more in depth, but essentially the only reason that this is number 2 and not number 1 on my list is effectively because it is fairly complicated in terms of the science, and some of the wording on the cards as well as in the rules can be really difficult to wrap your head around if you're not used to playing it. But after you get through 1 or 2 games, it gets a lot easier very quickly, and on top of that, it's very, very malleable in terms of the number of players as well as the difficulty, so it can keep you entertained for a very, very long time. Pathogenesis, my number 2. For this list, there are 2 honorable mentions I want to discuss really quickly. First off is Pandemic Contagion. In this game, it takes the pandemic formula of fighting against diseases and flips it on its head, where the players are playing as diseases. Effectively, you're trying to spread yourself across the world as quickly as possible to earn the most amount of points by destroying cities. Effectively, it's only an honorable mention though, because frankly, there are other games that do this theme much better, and they do it in a more scientific way in terms of being able to alter yourself and make yourself better and more efficient and all of that kind of thing. And on top of that, when you think of pandemic, generally you're going to think about I'm going around curing disease. So it's a little bit difficult, at least for me personally, to wrap my head around. That said, it's not a bad game. It's just not for me on this list personally. The second honorable mention I wanted to talk about is Virulence. This game, while it is directly about viruses, because you're talking about virulence and you're trying to see how devastating and infectious you are, it is is in essence a trick-taking game, with the idea being that whoever has the highest number wins. So it's not really strategic, it's not really scientific in terms of what you're actually doing. But that said, it is certainly a game that has a scientific theme about viruses and things of that nature, and it is one that works really well as a quick play multiple times or filler game or things of that nature. So it does work at that level, but for me personally, just not on this list. And so now we're gonna get right into number 1. At number 1, I've got Plague Incorporated, the board game. This is an adaptation of the digital game of the same name, which allows you to play as some sort of disease-causing organism, with the goal being that you want to spread around the entire world and eventually kill the entire population of the planet. Effectively, I love this game for the mechanics that it has, that it puts into a really well done and accurate scientific context. Essentially, you have things like modifying the way that you spread yourself. So you can become aerosolized, you can spread by water, you can spread by bodily fluids, all sorts of different stuff like that. You can look at birds and insects, all of those types of things. And in addition, I love the way that it models how infections spread, in terms of you need to have some sort of a connection between multiple cities, and eventually you're going to see things start to shut down. You're going to start to see people gather up in large areas, such as for Olympics and things like that, which will enable your infection to spread even more. And then on top of that, you can mutate yourself, not only to become more infectious and gain new routes of transmission, but you'll also be able to get symptoms. And eventually, depending on how severe your symptoms are, you'll start to be noticed, and then potentially the people will start working on a cure against your particular organism. I love that they use actual terminology for a lot of the different aspects here. I love that they have the mutation aspect, the antibiotics, all sorts of different things like that. It's a very, very well done game, and it has exploded in popularity with the COVID-19 crisis, which I understand, but is honestly kind of sad, because one would hope that it wouldn't be something like this that causes sales to increase. But that said, it is a wonderfully well done game that does a great job of showing how epidemics spread. And it has even gotten to the point of being memed out during the COVID-19 crisis. So all in all, Plague Incorporated, the board game, is my number 1. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my top 5 favorite virus-themed board games. So the fact is that COVID-19 is stressful. It has been devastating, and it is a very dangerous virus that has been at the forefront, or very near the forefront, of all of our minds for the last few weeks at least. We have seen massive media coverage of virtually nothing else for what feels like forever now, and certainly this is a big part of why I wanted to make this video, because it is a hot button issue. It is something that people are thinking about, and I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, like, haha, you know, we have to quarantine ourselves, so, you know, let's have some fun with it. You know, let's play some board games. Let's play board games about why we're quarantined and all this kind of stuff. But on a very serious note, I also, as a scientist, wanted to talk a little bit about the virus itself and what you guys can do to try to avoid it, essentially. So first off, COVID-19, like I said, is a coronavirus. This causes respiratory infection. If you get it, you'll get flu-like symptoms. That means fever, body ache, chills, coughing, sneezing, things along those lines. If you have those symptoms, do as much as you can to self-isolate. Keep yourself away from other people. Stay at home. Don't leave the house. Look up your local, state, and national government rules as to what you should do. A lot of them will say, keep away from other people. Some of them will say call a health department to indicate you might be infected so that you can get tested. Some places will say go straight to the hospital. Make sure that you look up what you should do. That said, if you're just going to be at home, have some soup, take some cough suppressant medication, eat some saltine crackers, you know, just try and relax. It is a virus. It will not respond to antibiotics, but it will respond to things like NyQuil, Dayquil, fever reducers, acetaminophen, things along those lines. Those are okay as long as it is okay for you personally to take those medications. So don't take this as medical advice, please. This is just general sort of advice of what you should expect and what you might be able to do in order to help yourself. That said, if you are not infected, take sensible precautions to avoid getting infected. This means things like washing your hands, trying to avoid touching your face. If you have to cough or sneeze, do so into your elbow rather than into your hand, because that means that you are less likely, at least, to start spreading germs. That said, don't do two things where you sneeze into your elbow and then you greet people by bumping elbows. That doesn't work. If you're sneezing into your elbow, go ahead and shake hands, or, fist bump, whatever it happens to be. In addition, make sure that you avoid large social gatherings. So avoid large groups of people, and in general, keep a social distance, that is to say about 3 feet between you and anybody else who is relatively close by. Again, a lot of places have shut down most public events, larger events, especially of like 50 or more people, I believe it is. And it's up to us to make sure that we stay safe and that we get what we need and that we can just try our best to ride this out. Again, COVID-19 is devastating. It is very dangerous. So be careful, be sensible, take the precautions that you need to make sure that you and your loved ones are all safe. The last thing that I wanted to note about this in particular is that if you do get sick, do remember that the recovery rate is fairly high. For viruses, it is relatively high. So if you're young and reasonably healthy, you should recover. But again, make sure you isolate yourself, especially from older folks, as well as folks with either respiratory issues such as asthma or bad immune systems, because those people are most vulnerable to this particular virus. But on a lighter note, again, I hope that you liked the video. Of course, please share any of your personal thoughts in the comments below, any of your particular favorites for these games, or just in general, what are your quarantine games? If you're in quarantine, what are you playing and why? Do you enjoy it? Are you having a good time? I mean, it's a bad situation for everybody all around the world, but at the very least, we can try our best to make the most of it. Of course, as always, we got to do this. If you haven't done so already, take a look at all my various social media pages, because you can interact with myself and my channel in a bunch of really fun ways. But that said, once again, thank you very, very much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Everybody, please stay safe, be careful, and take those precautions. I want you all to be happy, healthy, and well. But regardless, I will see you next time.